the Associate Chief Justice, Cullen, ruled that he will not grant an extension to Trans Mountain to December 12th. He said that the work they're seeking to do was not necessary, and so no extension to the injunction was necessary.
All right, so Kinder Morgan is moving on, for now, removing its drilling equipment and finishing up whatever test drilling it has been doing. It seemed to manage to get some work done, despite the relentless pestering of protesters trying to stop them. Those protesters grew in the masses to about 300 this weekend on Burnaby. They're celebrating what they call is a victory against the company they call themselves land defenders. Let's bring in J.J. McCullough to talk a little bit more about your world, which has become very ugly, gaining national attention over the last couple of weeks. And we should point out that today is the last day of that court-ordered injunction to keep protesters off the mountain. So Kinder Morgan basically has to go at this point.
Yeah, from what I've read in early reporting, and it is still quite early out here, that Kinder Morgan has basically vacated the mountain at this point. They've packed up all of their stuff. They've gone home. You know, essentially, they say that they've got what they needed. They wanted they wanted the injunction extended. They wanted to do more experiments. They wanted to finish extracting 2 rock samples. From what I understand, they were only able to extract one of the samples that they were looking for, but they got what they needed. And, you know, it's very difficult to spin this as anything but a victory for the protesters. I mean, they got all of their charges dismissed. You know, no one's going to have a criminal record from any of this. They got Kinder Morgan to leave. You know, the courts seem to side with them. So, I mean, it is a victory for them, I would have to say. Yeah, and it only fuels their ambitions. I mean, so score one for them. They'll just move on to the next project. And, you know, it's becoming to the point where, you know, you have to start looking at Canada as a whole now. These handful of, you know, 26-year-old, I don't know what they do with their time, but these professionally paid protesters, is this their new job in life, is to hold up the rest of Canada? Well, I mean, that's a fair point to a point, but at the same time, it does seem like British Columbia popular opinion is much more on their side than it is on the side of the oil companies. I mean, the fact is that the mayor of Burnaby. Let's stop there. The media coverage of it, I think, has to play a big point in it. And so you can get anyone on side, depending on how you tell the story. If you don't tell the entire story, which is, oh yeah, did you know Brigitte de Pape is paid to do this professionally? I mean, if you just take it at its face value, you see a lot of nice and feel-good, heartwarming stories, and you can't help but feel bad because the otters and the birds and the bees are all going to be, you know, destroyed. If you don't actually get all the facts to it, you'll have a different perspective. No, I agree, and I think that, frankly, there has been a great deal of ignorance about what is exactly going up on Burnaby Mountain. I mean, the fact is that if you watch some of the mainstream coverage of it that, you know, sort of takes the protesters' side rather uncritically, you would very much think that they're laying the pipe right now. Yeah. Like, you would think that, like, this pipeline is an imminent thing that's just a matter of time. But as I said, all they were doing was extracting 2 rock samples from very small holes. They cut down, I think, around 13 trees to do so. So, I mean, this was not some sort of massively invasive project. This was just, you know, phase 1 of what is destined to be a very long, very arduous, you know, Keystone-esque bureaucratic slog that could take years and years before it comes to any sort of resolution whatsoever. And I mean, like, because right now, for instance, what's going to happen in the new year is that there's going to be the public hearings, and of course that's going to be a big spectacle. And then, you know, the National Energy Board is going to have to consider the rock samples and consider all of the rest of Kinder Morgan's submissions about the pipeline route that they want to do, and do all of these environmental tests. And then, of course, the provincial government is going to get involved, and Premier Clark's government has, of course, their big, you know, five standards that have to be met to meet their satisfaction, and then the federal government has to get involved. So, I mean, this is a long process. And frankly, it should be noted as well is that the process is long in part because it takes environmental considerations very seriously, that there are lots and lots of checks and balances and scientists involved. So the idea that Kinder Morgan is just kind of showing up to Burnaby Mountain and just blasting something through is just completely ignorant. And yet that is increasingly the way that these stories are spun, that there is in fact no accountability whatsoever. It's just the evil oil companies coming in to rape the land versus the plucky gang of little Brigitte de Papes who are, you know, bravely waving their little cardboard signs. I mean, that's not true at all, but I think a lot of people are inclined to believe it's true because that's a more compelling story and people like to side with the underdog.
Yeah, but let's be honest. A lot of reporting today is simply reading a press release, and you take that little, you have to copy and paste it, and you go, okay, here's what they're here for, put some color and sound in, and then here I'll do my bridge here. I know how stories are written, and I know that unless you really understand the issue on both sides, you're not going to properly present the facts to the public, which is unfortunate because we're seeing this trend, because now you've got Couillard and Premier Kathleen Wynne, this east-west pipeline that really isn't, construction at all other than this small portion in Quebec. Now that's going to become a very big headline because why? Because two premiers want to appease the environmentalists and their green legacy, so they're going to make a big stink about this, and they're going to hold up what should be a very straightforward procedure of getting, oil replacing OPEC oil and moving it across our own country. And I suspect that the media will eat it up, and Premier Wynne will go down in the books as fighting to protect the environment in Ontario when she darn well knows that has nothing to do with it.
Yes, well, I mean, it's worth noting that Premier Couillard and Premier Wynne's sort of statement of principles are very much based on what Premier Clark out here has been championing. The idea that that there should essentially be political metrics for determining the merits of economic infrastructure projects. No, I mean it's true. I mean it just seems like the concept of pipelines, the concept of anything involving oil, has just become this sort of totemic demon thing that you rally against and you whip up votes and you whip up support because you tie it to causes that are very fashionable. You tie it in some very vague way to the environment or to global warming or to cutting down trees or to the First Nations people or these kind of things. And oftentimes these analogies or these connections are not made particularly clear. Like people are not actually presenting hard science. If they had hard science on their side, then presumably the National Energy Board would be persuaded by it and they would make their decisions accordingly. But I mean, the way that they're trying to sort of salt the earth and prejudge and render guilt before any evidence has been considered, that is what's very troubling to me. The idea, as you see with the mayor of Burnaby and with the protesters in general, is that they just kind of they wave their hand, the National Energy Board, it's just all corrupt, we just can't take them seriously. Well, when you're sort of poisoning the discourse in that kind of way, when you're saying that even the checks and balances and vigorous scientific testing that we have set up to appease their very concerns, when you're saying all of that is illegitimate, well then essentially you're making all of your economic decisions basically based on ideology and politics, and that is just not the way you run a healthy economy.
Right. No, but nonetheless, it's becoming a huge hiccup, and it's going to inevitably hurt us because businesses will at some point say it's not worth doing business in Canada because ones or twos of people are tying up a nation of millions and billions and billions in business that can be done. So what's a guy like the Prime Minister supposed to do? Is he supposed to weigh in? Or, because he's been very quiet on this, and I suspect there's a number of reasons for that, what's a guy like Harper to do to get things moving without being villainized as the great bird and bee and animal hater and tree killer?
I don't know. That's a very good question, isn't it? I mean, the fact is that there's so much politics wound up in all of this, and the Prime Minister is ultimately a politician, is that he has to weigh very carefully, his political considerations versus what he believes is in the best interest of the country. Because I do think that just the sort of white-hot rage over pipelines, certainly in my province, has made the Tory party on somewhat precarious ground for the next election because people associate, and you see this, all of the protesters, they're rallying against Prime Minister Harper just as loudly as they're rallying against Kinder Morgan. So the two, interests are very much infused. And there are a lot of Tory MPs who are at great, I believe, political liability by being seen as on the side of these very unpopular oil construction projects. So, I mean, the Prime Minister can do what he's continued to do, which is, as you said, sort of backpedal, take a soft hands-off approach, as he did with the Northern Gateway pipeline, which he endorsed in only the most tepid of language. Or he can, hunker down and say, screw all of you, these are important projects for the national economy, and I'm going to plow ahead with them, and you guys are all wrong, and he could suffer the political consequences, which may mean that he loses the next election. So as I said, it becomes a real consideration of politics versus principle. Yeah,
but the bottom line is they will be built, they need to be built, and we've got to get the product to market. Because I can't understand, if these environmentalists truly care about the environment, if they actually think rail is better. I mean, I know in their perfect world, the oil would just simply stay in the ground and go away. That's just not reality. And so I guess the next best thing is rail cars. And so maybe they should visit a place like Lac Mégantic and ask the folks there how they feel about it.
Yeah, they don't seem to make those kind of analogies, do they? I mean, there's a bit of a sort of cognitive dissonance, whereas like you oppose the pipelines, well then logically that just means the oil will stay in the ground, as you said, but of course that won't happen. They'll just find alternate ways of transporting it, routes that are often much more dangerous and much more precarious. But I mean, they see it again as in rather uncompromising terms. Like they do very much believe that by protesting a few rock samples being extracted from Burnaby Mountain, that somehow Canada is going to get off oil, and that, you know, we'll wake up tomorrow and we'll all be using sun and solar. But unfortunately, you know, politics is often not a rational business. Ideology is often not a rational business. People believe things very strongly in the absence of evidence, and unfortunately that's often how elections are decided, not by what facts are, but what people feel is true.
But hey, if you're a complacent media and you don't challenge these thoughts and you don't challenge these debates and these arguments, and if you want to pretend, you know, to put the argument forward just as it is, then you're part of the problem, and it's irresponsible because you're displaying, you're not telling the whole truth. You know, anyway, I gotta leave it there.
Well,
I just gotta
it's
leave it there.
you know, the famous line about Canada is, you know, we're a country that's rich by nature but poor by politics, and this is just another manifestation of that.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue talking about it because it's not going to stop. Where there's a pipeline, there will always be a fight. Thank you, JJ.